Before you dive into this story, stop scrolling for just 1 second. Imagine this. You're sitting at home, maybe in the USA or the UK, sipping your coffee, scrolling past endless videos and words, but then you see this headline. The major claimed she was out of the fight until an A-10 roared back missing metal. Doesn't that hit you like a shockwave? This isn't just a story. It's a ride, a roar, a punch of survival and grit that will drag you into the cockpit, into the dirt, into the raw reality of war. If you want more stories that grip your chest and refuse to let go, make sure you subscribe right now, because missing the next one would be like turning your back before the last round is fired. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. The desert burned beneath a merciless sky, the kind that warped the horizon into molten glass and made every shadow feel like a mirage. And Major Rachel Dunn told herself she was finished with this world, that her time as a warrior had ended the day shrapnel tore through her ribs and left her arm trembling with weakness no medal could disguise. Yet as she stepped off the transport to the fanfare of cameras and salutes meant to celebrate her resilience, she whispered in silence that she was out of the fight. No longer a pilot, no longer the fierce spirit that once roared through the skies in her A-10 Warthog. But wars do not honor promises, and fate does not bow to broken bodies. And so when the alarms split the air that morning, sharp and real, echoing with the thunder of incoming artillery, breaching the perimeter in defiance of every intelligence report, Rachel did not seek the bunker or the stage prepared for her speech, but instead found her steps carrying her to the hangar where the beasts of steel waited, engines growling like restless animals, ground crews scrambling in panic. And there in the dim light she saw one particular bird, scarred, patched, bearing the history of 100 battles, looking almost alive in its battered defiance, and though her mind screamed no, though every promise she had made in hospital silence begged her to turn back, her body knew the truth that war was not finished with her, that the desert demanded her return. And with hands that trembled, yet remembered every motion, she climbed into the cockpit, strapped down, and lit the engines that answered with a roar, as if recognizing its rightful soul. And in that moment, she was no longer the broken officer paraded for public morale, but the warrior who belonged to the sky. Surging into the firestorm above the base, where mortars clawed the sand and smoke curled upward like dark fingers. And though she told herself she was done, the instant her finger pressed the trigger and the GAU-8 Avenger spat its furious song of destruction across the battlefield, she understood that some bonds cannot be severed, that the Warthog and its pilot are forged together in fire, and yet destiny has a cruel hand, for even as she banked to strike again, a thunderous impact ripped across her left wing, tearing metal, shaking the frame, threatening to pull her into the abyss. But the A-10, ugly and indomitable, refused to die limping, bleeding steel, yet still alive, still flying. And as Rachel dragged the stick with every ounce of strength left in her body, she realized that her declaration of retreat had always been a lie, that survival itself had bound her to this fight. And when she turned back toward the base, her bird scarred, trailing smoke, pieces missing yet roaring with defiance, she was forced to face the truth that she was not out of the fight. She had never been out of the fight. And the war was only just beginning. The second assault came swift and merciless, shells tearing the earth open beyond the wire, as if the desert itself was splitting apart. And though her Warthog still carried the scars of the first fight, Rachel gritted her teeth and pushed it back into the air, ignoring the warning lights flashing across the console, because the base had no one else to hold the line. And as she banked over the ridges, she saw enemy convoys hidden beneath camouflaged nets, far larger and closer than intelligence had ever reported. Proof this attack was planned for months, not days. And with that grim revelation, she unleashed the GU-8 again, metal screaming, fire ripping the sand into storms. And in that furious moment, she realized she was no longer flying to survive. She was flying because only she could keep the war from swallowing everyone on the ground. Night fell over the desert like a shroud, heavy with the acrid smoke of burning convoys and the copper tang of war that clung to every breath. And though the base had survived the first and second assaults, Rachel knew with bone-deep certainty that the silence pressing down was not peace, but the pause before something greater. The kind of pause where even the stars seemed to hold their light in dread. And as she guided her mangled Warthog onto the runway, sparks spitting from the landing gear, metal shrieking in protest, she ignored the medics who rushed toward her and dragged her aching body straight to the command tent, demanding answers the maps and officers could not provide, because what she had seen from the air was too precise, too organized, a machine of war that no ragtag insurgent force could ever have assembled. And the truth that no one wanted to speak aloud was that someone with resources, training and intention had armed these enemies to wipe them from the earth. And Rachel, exhausted, ribs screaming, hands still trembling from the stick, realized she had been pulled into a fight far larger than survival. She refused to rest as the hours bled away, stalking the hangars, urging ground crews to patch holes with desperation, whispering encouragement to soldiers whose faces looked at her like she was the only anchor left. And though she wanted to deny it, to insist she was still out of the fight, the radar before dawn betrayed her, an ocean of blips surging from 3 directions, convoys bristling with armor, and worst of all, the unmistakable shadow of mobile missile systems advancing toward range, weapons far beyond the reach of local warlords, proof that their destruction had been orchestrated by unseen hands. It was suicide to launch again, yet when the order crackled and hesitation paralyzed the tent, Rachel strapped back into her bird, speaking to it like an old friend, and the Warthog, broken and ugly yet unyielding, clawed into the night sky with her, engines coughing fire but carrying her above the desert where headlights and dust trails marked the enemy's tide. She dove without hesitation, cannon roaring, shredding convoys, scattering men, weaving through blossoms of flak that lit the dark like hell's own fireworks. And every maneuver tore at her body until her vision blurred with pain. Yet she pressed on, because each run broke another spear of their advance. Each pass bought the base another minute to breathe. And when her eyes caught the massive silhouette of a missile launcher crawling from beneath camouflage netting, she felt the dread of truth heavier than gravity, that this war was not the deserts alone, that she was not fighting raiders but pawns in a larger game, and someone far away had decided she was expendable. By the time she limped her crippled Warthog back toward the base, engines choking, armor missing, dawn was spilling across the horizon like blood, and as intercepted enemy chatter crackled through the comms, Rachel knew with unshakable clarity that the war was no longer about survival or retreat. She was at the very heart of it now, and the storm had only just begun. The sun rose like fire over the horizon, revealing columns of enemy armor pushing through the ridges with a fury that could drown the base in minutes. But Rachel's battered Warthog, stitched together with desperation and sheer will, took to the skies one last time, every warning light screaming, every panel threatening to rip free, and she knew this would not be survival, but sacrifice. So she banked low, dove into the heart of the advancing tide, and unleashed everything the Avenger cannon had left until the desert itself shook, ripping open convoys and scattering men like shadows. And when a missile finally struck her wing and flames tore across the fuselage, she held the stick steady, turning her dying bird into a weapon, slamming it straight into the enemy's mobile launcher. The explosion ripping the desert wide and halting the attack in one final act of defiance. And as silence fell over the smoking battlefield, every soldier left on the base understood the truth, that the Major, who had claimed she was out of the fight, had saved them all by proving she never truly was.